All right. We have one more session, although having had that discussion just then, it feels like we could have had another session just on advertising. But let's not push this too far today. So yeah, one last session today, which is on governance. I'm just going to get our slides started again. And I'm just up here because I'm moderating. So if I can get the first speakers up. And that's actually Eddie, and over to you, Eddie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Here's your clicker.
Cool. Hi, everyone. So for those who don't know me, my name is Eddie Hurcombe. I'm a researcher here at the DMRC. Today, I'll be presenting an overview of global approaches from governments to regulating misinformation. So just by the by, the findings I'll be discussing today actually come from a project that me and my collaborator, James Meath from RMIT, we worked on this late last year. So as we all probably know now, and as we've all been discussing today, the 2016 US election was clearly a watershed moment for misinformation. Following that election, it soon became clear that social media platforms are hosting large volumes of problematic content, some of which was being blamed for influencing the election result. So as we've been talking about, some claimed that such content had been produced by state actors, and we won't name who, while others focused on the platforms themselves for letting so-called fake news run amok. Since then, misinformation and disinformation have become top-level policy issues. So following Germany's the passing of Germany's Network Enforcement Act in 2017, a growing number of countries are passing so-called fake news laws or developing platform codes of practice amongst other policies. So this is just a quick slide showing, as of late 2020, the amount of countries that have introduced or currently developing fake misinformation policies or laws. And yet there's still debate about how effective or appropriate these different approaches to tackling mis and disinformation have been. And there are also really concerning signs that governments are exploiting fake news concerns for their own gain. So against this backdrop, we set out to examine and evaluate this regulatory landscape. So today, I'll be providing an overview of our findings. I'll also be identifying some key trends. And lastly, I'll also assess the benefits and risks associated with existing regulatory approaches. And just over there is our citation for our report that we published last year. Jot it down. Okay, just first a note on definitions. Definitions, as we know today, or often, as we've been seeing today, have often been made between misinformation and disinformation. And these distinctions tend to reflect regulatory outcomes. So for instance, the EU's 2018 Code of Practice on Disinformation largely focuses, as the name suggests, on disinformation, mostly in the form of paid political advertising and other kinds of deliberate political interference. On the other hand, in Australia's recently introduced Code of Practice, which was co-developed by the industry body DTube, the definition of misinformation is purposely broad. This definition includes digital content that may not intend to cause harm, but which is still problematic. Definitions also can be politically motivated, as we'll see later on about how governments have defined fake news and so-called information manipulation. So these are the key trends that we have identified. Me and James identified 3 regulatory approaches for addressing mis and disinformation. And I just want to make a quick note here that when I'm talking about regulation today, I'm focusing on state-based interventions. So we're calling these 3 approaches, firstly, voluntary co-regulation, secondly, legislation, thirdly, supporting activities. We have also identified 3 themes across these approaches. We're calling these 3 themes, information quality, secondly, criminalizing speech, and thirdly, national security and election integrity. So now I'll just go on to explain what we mean by these 3 approaches. So first off, there is what we are calling voluntary co-regulation. These are policies that do not advocate for direct government intervention. Instead, these policies encourage digital media companies to develop their own measures to address mis and disinformation. The idea being here that these companies will sign up to these codes, these policies to avoid reputational damage. These policies are also typically designed to be flexible to account for an apparently fast-moving digital industry. Perhaps the most notable example of this type of policy is the EU's 2018 Code of Practice on Disinformation, which involved a voluntary code. Although other countries, such as Australia, have also recently developed voluntary codes as well. Both the EU Code and the Australian Code include minimum commitments or principles that all signatories must abide by. For instance, Australia's DigiCode introduces a mandatory commitment to reduce harms from mis and disinformation. But they also include other measures that signatories can simply opt into. In these codes, signatories to the codes are then held accountable for their commitments by way of regular reports to a government body on the measures that they have taken to address misinformation and disinformation. However, these co-regulatory approaches have already attracted criticism for being soft, so-called soft, on platforms, and in some instances have created problems for achieving meaningful transparency and accountability. This has particularly been the case in the EU, where they've had trouble with platforms reporting correctly what the type of measures that they have taken. Sorry about that. Which leads us to a second category, which we're calling legislation. As the name implies, legislation involves more direct attempts at combating mis and disinformation. These approaches tend to have generated the most controversy as well, as they've often involved new laws or new judicial processes. Examples of legislative approaches include Germany's 2017 Network Enforcement Act, which gives platforms a 24-hour deadline to remove problematic content once such content has been flagged or face fines. Problem content under the law includes incitement to crime and violence, as well as propaganda and treasonous activity. Over in France, in 2018, the government passed a law against information manipulation, which enabled public officials during election periods to bring a case of fake news before the courts. A French judge was then empowered by the law to take any proportional measure to stop the dissemination of such false information. And beyond Europe, there have also been cases of so-called fake news laws in countries like Singapore, Ethiopia, and Malaysia. And lastly, there is the approach we are calling supporting activities. This is kind of a broad category of government initiatives that goes beyond laws. Supporting activities often tackle mis and disinformation from the bottom up. Examples of these types of initiatives include the funding of digital literacy programs, as in the UK and elsewhere, as well as efforts to improve so-called critical thinking as attempted in the EU. Supporting activities can also include more innovative measures, such as the fact-checking Telegram chatbot that the Indonesian government funded, not developed, in 2019. So we now know these three main approaches to tackling mis and disinformation. But I'll now outline the three themes that we can see across these approaches. Just a reminder, these themes are information quality, criminalizing speech, and national security and election integrity. So firstly, we can see a common concern with so-called information quality across the three approaches that I've just talked about. By information quality, I mean attempts to monitor and/or improve information and news on platforms. So for example, the UK has called for platforms to create online tools to help users distinguish quality journalism, from unreliable sources. And Australia's DigiCode also includes a similar commitment for signatories to help them empower users to better identify and report misinformation. In addition, some of the supporting activities I've just talked about fit within this theme of information quality. As we just heard, Indonesia's Telegram chatbot is also concerned with improving information quality insofar as it's trying to fight the viral hoaxes that spread on messaging platforms. Another major theme is criminalizing speech. Here, we're referring to efforts at addressing mis and disinformation that outlaw certain kinds of speech and/or particular actors. These efforts have predominantly been legislative. So, for example, Germany's fake news law, which draws upon the country's criminal code, it certainly fits within this theme of criminalizing speech, and so does similar fake news laws in Singapore, Ethiopia, and Russia. The Singaporean law, for instance, requires platforms to put misinformation labels on content that the government deems false. In addition, those accused of spreading falsehoods now face jail and fines and jail time in Singapore. The Brazilian government also recently proposed a plan to fine and jail those that promote and finance false information. And lastly, our third theme is national security and election integrity. These are reforms that attempt to protect the integrity of domestic elections and public debate from hostile foreign actors. These reforms are also mostly legislative and focus, as the name implies, on disinformation. Examples of these reforms include France's recent requirement, that platforms report state-sponsored content during election periods, as well as the proposal I talked about earlier, which seeks to bring fake news before the courts during election periods. National security concerns are also visible in the German law, which bans propaganda and treasonous activity on platforms. Outside of Europe, another example within this theme of national security and election integrity are new laws in Taiwan that fine those that infiltrate and threaten national stability. So what should we make of all this? How can we assess these different approaches to regulating mis and disinformation? First off, we just want to emphasize that we think that governments taking mis and disinformation seriously is a good thing, and some of these approaches I've been talking about today are promising. For instance, enforcing transparency around such things as political advertising is really important, particularly during election periods, and so is holding platforms accountable through agreed upon standards. Also, funding digital media literacy programs and funding chatbots and anti-hoax campaigns, particularly campaigns that target at-risk groups, is also really important. But some of the approaches I've discussed today, which you may sort of know by now, are also quite concerning. Most clearly in this regard is the rise of so-called fake news laws in countries that do not have strong democracies, such as Singapore and Russia. As we have seen, these laws seem to be targeting political opposition. Other governments, such as Myanmar's, have simply been blocking the websites of those accused of spreading fake news. And in Myanmar's case, these websites have included human rights groups. And even within democratic contexts, these fake news laws have been problematic. For example, in order to avoid fines, platforms have responded to Germany's new fake news law by taking down all kinds of content, even content which wouldn't necessarily qualify under the law. And while focusing on information quality is really important, it is also often difficult to make hard and fast distinctions between news, information, misinformation, and disinformation. For instance, while it's important to deplatform and demonetize malicious media actors, such policy can also neglect how established and even otherwise responsible media can be big amplifiers of mis and disinformation. So some of the research on COVID conspiracies that maybe some of you have read that I've done with DMRC colleagues Axel Bruns and Stephen Harrington has demonstrated this point. So in that research, we found that mainstream outlets such as celebrity tabloids often amplified COVID conspiracies when reporting on them to audiences outside of the fringe social media spaces where those conspiracies originally circulated. In this respect, it is concerning that some regulatory approaches, such as the Australian DigiCode, deliberately exclude or otherwise deliberately exclude mainstream or otherwise sort of legitimate news sources. So, for example, the DigiCode does not cover content from news outlets with editorial codes. And of course, editorial codes are really important. But as I just talked about before, misinformation can be amplified even when outlets are simply following standard reporting procedures. And lastly, mis and disinformation is a multifaceted problem, which means that regulation is not always the best approach. Mis and disinformation is fueled by such things as political disengagement, a decline in trust in institutions, as well as discrimination against minority groups. These issues require broader whole-of-society responses, not simply government regulation. So going forward, I'm continuing this research into mis and disinformation policy. Currently, I'm writing a paper with James that evaluates the future of voluntary co-regulation in Australia in light of the EU moving towards a harder regulatory approach towards disinformation. And here's a citation again. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Over to you, Bondy and Jing.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has stuck through it for today. I'm back after 6 hours. And Meg is joining from Zurich, and we joked that we're both postdocs at European institutes, and we're on the same sleep schedule, despite me living 9 time zones apart from her. So apologies if this seems like it's coming from tired brains. We were asked to talk about TikTok and if we had anything that might relate to the theme of the symposium today. And so we decided to pull from a larger project that we've been working on for the past couple of years, looking at platformization of TikTok, to specifically look at TikTok governance. So I'm going to get started. And one of the questions that came up through the research that we were doing over the past couple of years is, when talking about TikTok governance, who is talking about TikTok governance? And the answer is a lot of different kinds of actors, from parents to doctors to government actors to moderation teams, and even so-called academic experts. There are lots of different viewpoints that are all expressing their views on how TikTok should be regulated and various different kinds of questions about content that's being posted on TikTok. But 2 things that we noticed from the broader conversation was, first, it seems to be very focused on removing harmful or abusive content from TikTok, and also a lot of the views seem to largely exclude the users themselves. So today we're going to be talking about a concept that we're calling visibility moderation, that looks at instances when users are trying to get their content to be more visible as opposed to being taken down, and we're going to be using views from individual users themselves. So now, let's see if this works. I'll turn it over to Meg.
Hey, Bondy, thanks for the introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. You hear me okay, Bondy? Give me a sign. Perfect. Yep. Okay, so in my part, I will first provide an overview about the particularity of content governance on TikTok, and to explain why governing TikTok matters. So first of all, the user base of this platform is much younger in comparison to other more established social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. And TikTok was launched as a Gen Z social media. Even though the app has recently attracted more mature users, it is still dominated by the youthful users. It is estimated that over 60% of TikTok users actually belong to the Gen Z cohort. And in the UK, another instance, a recent a survey revealed that almost 50% of children aged between 5 and 15 watched TikTok in 2020. So this kind of prevalence of underage users on TikTok has raised a wide concern for children's safety. And unsurprisingly, according to the platform's latest transparency report, almost a third of removed videos are related to concerns over children's safety. And the second factor contributing to the governance challenging on TikTok is the video format itself. Short videos makes this platform an easy target for propagating pornographic or violent content. And in comparison to text-rich or still image-based content, to monitor and to moderate video content is more technically demanding. For instance, live streaming, a feature also commonly used on TikTok, is notoriously difficult to regulate, especially in real time. And another reason why content governance is particularly difficult and also important on TikTok is the platform's logic or platform culture, which celebrate virality. To achieve visibility or influence on TikTok relies heavily on one's ability to create and to recreate viral trends. And in order to become viral, TikTokers keep pushing boundaries for the sake of gaining likes and views. Bondy and Ari actually have written a paper about suicide videos on TikTok, which is an example, even a very extreme example of this kind of practice of pushing boundaries. And in my own earlier research about science-related videos on TikTok, I also wrote about harmful, dangerous viral trends on the platform that was based on pseudoscience or misinformation. So considering this kind of complexity of content governance on TikTok, we conducted this study to discuss what kind of strategies have been implemented by TikTok and how TikTokers respond to them. And in this study, we designed this research around this concept of visibility moderation, which we define as the process through which digital platforms manipulate the reach of user-generated content through either algorithmic or regulatory means. We can talk about the characteristics of this so-called visibility moderation, focusing on its governing logic, mechanism, and impacts. And to begin with, one distinctive characteristic of visibility moderation is its governing logic. Whereas content moderation traditionally focus more on how platforms decide what is not to be seen, visibility moderation focuses on how things are made to be seen. With the rise of algorithmic curation, platform can now effectively regulate and manipulate information without relying on deleting, filtering, or suspending inappropriate information or users, but by intentionally promoting, amplifying, and prioritizing what is considered to be appropriate. And one example of this kind of governing logic is TikTok's intentional cultivation of trends or challenges that can boost the image of this platform. And such examples include hashtag learn on TikTok or hashtag for climate, and also other initiatives celebrate or encourage inclusiveness of this platform. In terms of governing mechanism involved in visibility moderation, on the macro level, we're talking about TikTok's platform-wide recommendation algorithm to personalize, curate, and prioritize content. On TikTok, for instance, the For You page personalized feeds, that's where personalized feeds are pushed to individual users. And this so-called For You algorithm, or the recommendation algorithm behind this For You page, is serving as this form of algorithmic gatekeeper. So this kind of gatekeeper exercise is powered by dictating how much exposure each individual video can receive. And on the micro level, of course, we also see visibility moderation through content creators and their viewers' collective curation of comments under each individual video, similar to the upvote and downvote features on Reddit. TikTok users can also participate in collective curation of content through their interaction with other people's comments. And in terms of impacts of visibility moderation, there are various issues related to, such as opacity, fairness, and efficacy. And the first issue, opacity, is relevant to almost all algorithmic ranking or recommendation system. However, we argue that where visibility moderation is concerned, the lack of transparency can be even more problematic. One more hardcore content moderation mechanism is in place, such as content removal and user suspension. This kind of intervention is visible, traceable, and could be potentially held accountable. In contrast, when soft interventions such as implement through visibility moderation, there is hardly any kind of evidence that can be used by either content creators themselves or regulators to keep the platform's action accountable. And to demonstrate issues related to fairness and efficacy, one example we can think about is the TikTok's manipulation of visibility of certain user groups in the name of preventing online bullying. According to a series of leaked internal documents from the platform in 2019 and 2020, videos featuring individuals with traits of so-called unattractiveness, disability, disorder, autism or Down syndrome were intentionally suppressed. And TikTok responded that this kind of measures were taken and were used to prevent online bullying or to prevent hate speech. And they also attributed mistakes to faults in its algorithm. However, in comparison to errors caused by their faulty algorithm, we argue that a larger issue in here is the faulty logic that is embedded in such governance system, which utilizes visibility moderation as a shortcut or cheap solution to protect the imagined vulnerable, or use visibility moderation as an easy way out to avoid potential controversies for self-interest by these platforms. And now I'm going to give the stage back to Bondy, and he will present the empirical side of our paper.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just to go quickly through the methods and the data that we collected, as part of a much larger project, we had conducted interviews with TikTokers, and through those conversations, we ended up getting some insights that speak to this concept of visibility moderation that we've developed. And so to justify including interview data for this more theoretical conceptual study, we're taking Mina Ruckstein and Linda Turunen's approach of rehumanizing platform studies by centering human beings as critical and creative actors in the larger platform situation. And yeah, we conducted grounded thematic analysis to kind of understand this larger research question of how creators perceive and negotiate visibility on TikTok. There's a lot that we talk about in the paper that was cited in the visibility moderation slide, which is currently under review. But to just draw out some of these insights, I think it's really useful to see that there were a lot of ways in which these interviewees tried to make sense or understand how their visibility was or was not coming to the surface when they were posting videos. Some of them had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of followers, and they discussed their own interpretations of this concept of shadow bans. Some of them mentioned that there's this confirmation bias effect where when they start talking about, oh, my videos are being taken down, then they start noticing that more videos are being taken down. And several interviewees directly put their finger on this idea of fairness, particularly when it comes to marginalized creators, queer creators, Black, Indigenous people of color on TikTok, and how they felt like the platform itself wasn't doing enough. And then on the other side of trying to make sense, there were also these various different strategies that these creators described and how they would negotiate, ways that they would try and be seen on this platform when it was so difficult to be seen. And it kind of speaks to what Luisa and Ariadna were talking about earlier about the various ways in which creators may try to professionalize their content by engaging in activities like posting content every day or posting links to their content on other platforms. So there were a lot of ways in which creators were trying to understand why they weren't being seen and trying to figure out ways in which they could help themselves be seen. And this does connect to other research that's been done in this space, but what really interests us in the context of TikTok is how central these creators positioned the algorithm, the TikTok For You page recommender system. So in addition to these strategies, they also described some concerns. And again, to position this or to ground this in some previous work, my friend Kelly Cotter just published this incredible article in Information Communication and Society called Shadow Banning is Not a Thing, where she advances the concept of black box gaslighting. It's a fantastic paper. You should check it out if you haven't seen it. And this is the justification for us using this interview data to put forth issues that future studies and regulators and even the platforms themselves should pay attention to. So because these user understandings do have consequences for the future governance efforts that will take place. So interviewees mentioned issues of scale and acknowledging how difficult it would be to have either themselves kind of going through and removing harmful comments, or even teams of moderators working to keep certain types of content removed while prioritizing other types of content that they wanted to promote. They mentioned that there was a lack of support if they found that they were having issues or if they were getting community guidelines violations. They were not really having much success when they would try and contact support at TikTok. There was issues related to anonymity and verification, where there's very low barriers to entry when you're creating a TikTok account. So they would find that some people would have like 20 accounts and they would just keep on posting like harmful comments, for example. They talked about the amount of time that it took to actually go through and moderate their comment sections if they were trying to remove content. or harmful comments specifically, or things that they found to be harassing or abusive. There's this notion of, similar to using the systems of governance themselves built into the platform that are there to take down harmful content. Creators were describing instances of report bombing, where they would have a video that would talk about their identity as a queer creator or anything related to a Black Lives Matter movement, and how that would just be bombarded with reports almost immediately. And oftentimes it would be those videos that got taken down, and they would have difficulty trying to negotiate with the platform to get them back up. And of course, all of these things that we've discussed, the harms are magnified when it comes to any of these groups from marginalized communities. So there's a lot that we have left out for in the interest of time, but there's information and there's concepts connected to this argument that we have in this paper that's currently under review. However, if you are interested in reading more, and thank you so much for the plug earlier, Axel, I feel less shameless about this. We wrote a book, and the book is currently in production, and it'll be available later on this year. We're told that you'll be able to pre-order it at the beginning of 2022. But yeah, we discuss the infrastructures of TikTok, the history of short video platforms, TikTok's economies, TikTok communities, and of course governance, as well as some various other things with our co-author Patrick Wickstrom. So if that's something that interests you, that will be available to read next year. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Bondy. And lucky last, Ashwin, come on down. Literally the last presentation of the day, so Ashwin, over to you. Make it a good one.
That's a lot of pressure. So yeah, I'm Ashwin Agappa. I'm here again, but this time I'm going to talk about something else. But again, not about Twitter or Facebook. It's about another platform that I'm studying. So this presentation is about the research that I'm doing as part of my PhD, where I'm studying the alternative video streaming platform called DTube, and how content moderation is working and how it's changing over a period of time. That's what I'm going to talk about. Before I talk more about content moderation, just to show you what DTube is, this is what DTube looks like. It might look familiar because DTube are very openly saying that they have copied YouTube's interface because that's working, and why not copy something that's working. But what is DTube? According to DTube's own definition, it's a proof of concept applying social blockchain mechanism to an online video sharing platform. It's about creating an alternative to YouTube based on decentralized distributed architecture. Again, a lot of jargons, but I can talk about a few of them as I go. One big aspect about the platform is we don't want to have advertising revenue as part of our business model. No personal data collection. Very importantly, they wanted to drive the community-powered content moderation. And again, the last parts are very idealistic, like trust based on maths and cryptography is what they wanted to do. How do you study a platform like this, especially if it's emerging, it's changing over a period of time? That's where my framework for study comes in. That's platform biography defined by Jean Burgess and Nancy Bam, where this framework looks at looking at the narrative of change of platforms, how different aspects come together, intersect with human lives, and then hence shaping the platform. And I'm very fortunate to have Jean Burgess as my principal supervisor for the research. So this is a good framework for me to study a platform like DTube. And when I study a platform like DTube, I need to identify the key aspects that are important to DTube and how those aspects have changed, or features or aspects that are changing over a period of time. In case of DTube, there are three main aspects, one is a voting system, which determines the content visibility, content moderation, and the monetization, because everybody who participates on the platform gets paid in cryptocurrencies. There is a whole lot of forums like Discord, Telegram, Reddit, which are kind of supporting the functioning of the platform, and there is the underlying blockchain itself, which is central to the functioning of the platform itself. For now, I'm not going to talk about all the features. I'm just going to focus on content moderation itself. When DTube started, when DTube started as a platform, it was very idealistic. They wanted to recreate trust. Their idea was there is no algorithm. It's just going to run as very linear model. Community of users are going to determine what is important on the platform, which based on upwards and downwards content will get higher visibility, or content can get suppressed. And of course, the social blockchain idea is whenever you participate on the platform, either by being a creator or by just viewing or by just being audience on the platform, you get some cryptocurrency incentive. Very idealistic, techno-deterministic kind of beginning, but again, things are not as easy as it sounds, because when you use a decentralized model, it's like the torrents where a video can be hosted on any place. Hence, you could have like child pornography or like violent videos that can come onto the platform, and it's not up to the platform to take it down because it's hosted somewhere else. It's shown on the DTube interface, so things get complicated. Of course, DTube's interface was not great. It didn't grow rapidly. It has a very slow growth, but it did come across problems. And of course, that initial model of community moderation was not working. So they needed a little more sophisticated system to kind of do the moderation. So they introduced this voting system where it's not just a simple upvote or downvote. There is a scale where you can choose how much voting power you can apply to a vote. That process is very complicated. I have just come to understand that process. I'm not going to explain the entire process, but what happens is basically if I have more DTube coins or DTube currency, the cryptocurrency, I get more voting power, and hence I'll have more power to either upvote or downvote. And if I like something, I can put all my vote and make it visible like as a top video. If I don't like something, I can downvote it and then suppress the video itself. So that logic came into place. It's been working for some time. Again, it's not perfect because after they introduced this, they also kind of opened up the platform with the APIs and introduced this idea of bots, where some of the key leaders, key participants who knew the system, who have some technical background, deployed bots to kind of get rid of content that they didn't like. Thankfully, the kind of leadership that is leading the team is left-leaning, libertarian kind of cohort. So what they are doing is like they're downvoting hate speech and anything that's far right, which brought a debate in the community where new users who are kind of far right, again, users who might have gone to Gab, might have come here and then started posting, they are complaining that while DTube is about transparency, DTube is about free speech, why are you like oppressing content or suppressing certain content over the others? And they go on to these debates about why a certain video has got downvote as compared to others, and by automating, like by using bots, they're automating the content moderation to a certain extent. So the content moderation has changed from just being simple community powered to like a semi-automated kind of process. And hence there is more debate going on, and it's still going on. So this is like my work in progress. I am still figuring out how to, what my initial findings are, which are kind of shaping up right now. At the same time, the platform itself is going through a lot of changes because, again, it's not stable. The UI is not best. It has to be fixed. But there is this techno-deterministic kind of attitude there. Like you see here, what I've highlighted. There's a lot of debate going on about like what do we do with like getting more people on board? How do we get rid of like bad content, etc. And one of the answers is like everything else can be solved with engineering. So with that attitude, they go on to build things which again is helping. And at this stage, what is happening is like again a set of leaders who have a lot of DTube coins with a lot of voting power have deployed bots which are selectively upvoting certain content, selectively downvoting certain content, and they are like kind of curating this blacklist, whitelist. So the content moderation has gone from like being purely community driven to like semi-automatic to like this community of bots kind of moderating the content. And why is this kind of significant is because DTube is one of the many platforms like this, which is about cryptocurrency based video sharing or social media platform. And again, they have not figured out what is the right way to moderate content, but they've been figuring out. And also one of the reasons why the leaders are enthusiastic about suppressing hate speech is because they can generate more currency by downvoting content. So there is a material value involved, hence they are kind of interested in suppressing hate speech kind of content. At the same time, now the debate is like, okay, let's not worry about hate speech because of such certain kind of downvoting, we are not attracting enough users on like, we're not getting enough users on the platform. So let's focus only on sexual explicit content or like violent content. Let's moderate those content because they have legal concerns surrounding it. And let the community moderate hate speech and things like that and let it be there. So the idea is like, let the platform grow. So what's happening is like, basically the material value is more important than the social value to the team. And of course, everything can be solved by technology is what the attitude is, which kind of becomes problematic because in creating solutions to certain things, they are creating more problems. Also going back to something Stephen Harrington was talking about, the idea of democracy in the morning, they have given a democratic model where like majority can participate and like create a discourse and keep it going. But again, if the majority is far-right kind of participants, there'll be far-right kind of content here. And so far, like I said, they have been careful to suppress certain kind of content. They have not attracted far-right participants, but a platform called DLive, which is similar to DTube, was used by the capital attackers to live stream the attack, and then they made cryptocurrencies out of it. And of course, the moderation didn't work, so they needed like a very high-level intervention from the team to kind of go back and like kind of ban the users and things like that, which again, DTube can be that in a few months if it can, again, host certain people like that. So there are all these debates going on, and of course, I am in the process of kind of writing my findings and putting it all together as part of my research. Yeah, that's it I had for my content moderation alternative platforms. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. If I can get all the speakers to come back to the front again, and we might just stop sharing so we can get Jing visible again too. Yes, sir? Yep.
We've got one on the Zoom for Eddie from Liam Carter. So the question is, how would you classify attempts at changing the architecture of social media and search platforms, such as regulating the kinds of algorithms that these companies use to populate news feeds? And what are your thoughts about that sort of approach to improving information quality?
I guess it might depend on what kind of form it takes. I know in Australia, that in the News Media Bargaining Code, for example, there was originally going to be sort of provision in there that about algorithmic transparency for news organisations, and that was going to be enforced. So I guess that's a kind of legislation attempt. That was kind of that bit about algorithm transparency for news. So the idea was that, just to explain if I get it correctly, that that news organisations had to give, advance notice to, platforms had to give advance notice to news organisations before they changed their algorithms. But in the kind of negotiations, the tough negotiations, that bit was kind of thrown to the side. And so I guess that would be a kind of legislative approach. That's how I classify it. But I haven't seen that many of attempts by governments to intervene into the algorithm, into algorithmic transparency, or even to change the algorithms. It's really interesting.
Thank you. I didn't introduce myself before. I'm Rita Jabri-Markwell, and I work with the Australian Muslim Advocacy Network. And we've made a lot of submissions on disinformation, the Disinformation Code, and we participate in the Give CT and the Christchurch Call Advisory Network. So on the Australia's Disinformation Code, one of our primary concerns was that the definition of disinformation relied on there being serious and imminent harm caused by the disinformation. And our criticism was that disinformation by its very nature is a creeping threat, and it's very hard to prove that there is imminent harm until after the harm has happened. And that's not much use to us. So we were arguing that it should just be a serious and not have that imminent requirement. Do you have any more intelligence on, where this code is up to, whether, because ACMA was apparently going to review it and endorse it. We now know that it's operating, that they're accepting complaints. But any further takes you have on it and where it's up to and how likely it is to be totally thrown in the bin and redone again would be appreciated.
No, good question. The point about serious and imminent and serious harm is a real good one, and I think that's really valid critique. I guess what they're trying to say there is that there's someone calling for violence against someone immediately, then it gets to get taken down. But yeah, I think you're right that it's kind of a way to, it kind of neglects, that kind of creeping hate speech and creeping dehumanization, maybe, creeping that kind of content. On the status of the code itself, so it has been implemented. It seems to be a bit, last time I checked, a bit up in the air because there was the possibility of ACMA or the minister stepping in if platforms weren't complying with the code, or that they seemingly weren't taking it seriously through providing regular tailored reports. There was supposed to be feedback from ACMA regarding the code and performance of signatories to the code. That was supposed to happen around a couple of months ago, but I didn't see it, and I haven't actually checked. So I've got to check that, see if the feedback has happened, and that feedback was supposed to, depending on that feedback, the government apparently may discuss stepping in more forcibly to ensure compliance, but I will have to check that. But thank you, really good question.
Other questions?
I have a question for Bondy and Jing. So it's just because you've been doing work around the book, I was wondering whether from content moderation to visibility moderation came after the fact. So when you were doing the interviews, you realized that content creators were really concerned about not takedowns and not other forms of content moderation, but really, number one concern was visibility, or whether you had an hypothesis, because we know that the algorithm on TikTok is really important, and then you articulated the interviews around this question. So, yeah.
I can speak to the interview portion. Do you want to talk about whether it came before or after, Meg?
Yeah, I have to say, like, for me, the main inspiration for this concept actually is from another co-authored work I did with Bondy and Chen Xu, another previous DMRC colleague. So we were looking at the content moderation on Chinese version of TikTok, and we look at this phenomenon of how the platform responded to societal and the governmental criticism over harmful information by intentionally changing the interface and algorithm to promoting the so-called positive energy videos. So that was the very beginning. We found it's very interesting, so they kind of use so-called good energy, positive energy content to balance what can be perceived as harmful. And when we moved to our TikTok project, we seen that was when we're writing the campaign social activism chapter, I did a very systematic review of all the campaigns they have been doing since 2018. And we saw this kind of mirrored practice that has been happening on TikTok too. So every time responded to criticism, they kind of attempted to use promoting certain kind of TikTok for good campaign as a distracting strategy. And also because algorithm prioritize this kind of officially endorsed campaign, all the content creators will also jump on these hashtags to be part of this kind of campaign, hoping that the For You algorithm would pick them up. So that's from my side. And coincidentally, I think during Bondy's interview, and we kind of try to get more information from the actual content creators as well. And I think Bondy can say more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the structure of the interviews was basically following some of the structure of the book, where we were asking them questions about how they used interfaces on TikTok differently than other platforms, how they made money, if they made money, and then issues connected to governance that they might have experience with. And it's not mentioned in the slides, but in the paper that we've written for this specific topic, we mentioned that we only actually drew from about 14 of the 22 interviews that we conducted because not everyone had experiences that they felt relevant or that they wanted to share or that came to their mind. And unsurprisingly, probably the creators that did were creators who were Black or from queer communities. And the things that they noticed were things that affected them or other people, like them. And so we were able to kind of match some of those experiences. But when we had talked about putting this together as a paper as opposed to in the book, so in the book we don't go into that much detail about this concept, but it's something, as Meg said, that we wanted to draw out from previous work that we had done. We thought having that empirical stakeholder level viewpoint would help to humanize it, but also to provide some more perspectives as opposed to our own as researchers. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Any other questions? We've got go.
I've got a question for Anand and about DTube. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the model of democracy that DTube is built on is based on a very direct democracy where, well, people moderate people based on the values that they hold. And although the creators of DTube were probably left-leaning, libertarian, utopian, techno-utopian kind of type, I'm very curious to see what happens to problematic, especially borderline problematic content, not content that directly violates any laws or regulations, but content that really plays with the boundaries. Like in your research, have you seen what usually happens, even anecdotally, to this kind of content? Like, can we use your study as an indicative model to see if direct democratic models on these platforms may work?
It's an interesting question. I think their intention was to make this direct democratic model where like majority can participate. But the way the algorithm or the way they have automated it now, it's become a very oligarchic kind of capitalistic system where like the more you have, the more currency or voting power you have, the more power you have to kind of manipulate the content on the platform itself. So it's kind of changing. And now the debate is like, can we go back to like a good like democratic model where, so basically things that kind of address the borderline content where like certain users who might be like on the borderline, who want to participate, want to share videos from YouTube, but they cannot because these certain leaders with like a lot of millions of voting power are kind of suppressing such content because again, some of them have been being done by like manual kind of curation because again, it's not a big platform, so it's manageable. I think the challenge is about scaling. When they scale this model, what happens? And I think that's where they are. They are at that edge of like trying to scale it to a bigger model which can work properly, but it hasn't happened and they're still figuring it out. So yeah, I think if they find an answer, I might be able to figure out an answer to saying, okay, there is a viable model to kind of this democratic participation. So, and of course, like because of their techno-deterministic kind of approach, it's always about like, can we get more cryptocurrencies? And also it's kind of related to Bitcoin's rise. Every time there's an increase in Bitcoin price, there's a lot of activity in DTube. So it's not much about content now, it's more about cryptocurrency. So it's kind of taken over that way.
Just if I can draw you out a bit further on that one, Ash, and I'm not asking you to solve DTube's problems for them, right? I'm sure the community can do that, but perhaps also to TikTok as well, if there's a relevant comment here. Just the governance and this kind of model of whole of platform governance that seems to thread through a few of these talks, that how it presents problems, right? How like kind of one set of rules for everyone, in fact, is perhaps somewhat broken. I'm thinking about Reddit or other platforms where there is a bit more of a distributed governance paradigm where kind of sub-communities aside the general rules or things, there might be a set of universal principles that apply to all, but then there are kind of localized ways in which they kind of figure it out themselves and do that. How do you see that happening in those platforms? Is it happening? Are there the emergence of particular sub-communities that do have kind of enforced, norms or such around problematic content, or how are the users themselves actually doing this and policing content. Policing is the wrong word, sorry, but looking at content that exists in their kind of bubble.
I think I have an answer because I did a recent data collection, a semi-structured interview with a participant and who has a proposal, and it's kind of an idea that is floating in the community of like decentralized platforms. And I think what Eddie was talking about, the multi-platform problem where, so again, the idea is like if it is decentralized, how do we kind of check the quality or nature of content? So there is this proposal about like doing a whitelist, blacklist kind of list that is shared across platforms. So they kind of, again, a decentralized model. So if the certain tags or certain keywords or certain patterns are detected in the video, they can kind of take it down or like flag it as problematic. So that's a proposal that one of the participant was suggesting, and I think if he's suggesting, it means there are talks going on in the larger like crypto platform kind of discourse, I think. So yeah, that's what I figured out recently.
Yeah, and I guess just to speak to the interviewees' perspectives of the people that I spoke to, there did seem to be a sense of rules being applied selectively, and yeah, it's not one size fit all, definitely. And there were specific examples that were brought up, and the one that comes to mind is around a specific derogatory slur that some creators would have their videos removed for using, and others wouldn't. And there was this question over, okay, why was it that the white person who is using this, clearly offensively is having that video being left up, whereas, in various different kinds of contexts, black creators are having their videos removed for using that specific word. And so it goes to that sense of trying to understand what is happening, why this is happening, and reading in their own kind of interpretations. And then, there was an interesting, I don't know if the article has actually come out yet, but I know that there was a TikTok moderator who has whistleblown in the past couple of months, and who's explained a little bit more about what it's like to be a content moderator and the amount of content that they're expected to sift through in each day, each week, and how that speaks to that problem of scale and how you can apply. You might be able to apply the rules for a short period of time, but after 70 hours a week or something like that, it starts to get more difficult from the human side of things. I don't know, Meg, if you have other thoughts that you wanted to add on to that as well.
No, I just think one thing you can add is the whole reporter bombing phenomenon you mentioned as a term you used earlier. Like the whole idea, it would be nice the community would figure it out bottom up. But we also, in our case, as we see how this kind of process can backfire. The whole reporting system is a kind of the platform's attempt to decentralize, outsource labor for the platform to identify potentially harmful content, whereas people actually abuse this feature to maliciously report certain things just because of different ideology they have, and they even use automated approach to executing such kind of a larger scale report bombing. Is a report bombing the term you used, Bondy, just now in the presentation?
Yeah, that's something, because people talk about review bombing or Zoom bombing or whatever, I couldn't find a citation, so if someone has one that we can use, otherwise maybe hopefully you can cite us to use that. And I think that this also kind of connects to Rosie Gillett's work on carceral versus restorative governance of platforms, where if you give these kind of tools that are meant to be punitive measures, people are going to abuse them. And so, trying to find ways to be restorative or to be transformational in the governance strategies, but that's, of course, much easier said than done.
Maybe they need DTube's model of having, a set number of reporting points or something that you can use, so you can't report bomb anymore, which is something that actually, there's a link to a much older site, Slashdot, which has a similar kind of moderation model and has had since the 90s, of having points that you can spend, of course, in reporting and in moderating. So that tends to limit that kind of report bombing, ultimately. Any other questions? So there's more comment than a question, I'm afraid. We're at that stage of the day. Any final questions? Otherwise, we might wrap up this session and thank our presenters again. Thank you all very much.